Imagine moving into a quiet countryside cottage, the kind where the walls breathe history, the floors creak with forgotten footsteps, and the air carries the weight of decades. Now imagine that in this unassuming home, nestled in the heart of Cheshire, England, time starts to blur. It's the early 1980s and Ken Webster, a local teacher, and his girlfriend Debbie moved into an old cottage in the quaint village of Dodlestone. What began as a simple renovation project quickly turned into one of the strangest and most unnerving mysteries of modern time. At first, it seemed innocent. Words, strange phrases started appearing on their 1980s home computer, a humble BBC Micro. But the language wasn't modern. The sentences were written in an archaic form of English, unfamiliar and cryptic. As the days passed, the messages grew more unsettling. They spoke of a man living in the same house, but centuries before, someone named Lucas from the 16th century. He claimed that he was receiving messages from the future. But it didn't stop there. The couple discovered footprints that couldn't have been made by anyone living in their home. There were strange marks as though someone or something was moving between worlds. The bizarre messages soon suggested that time itself was overlapping, as if past, present, and future were colliding in this one humble cottage. And Lucas, he believed they were the ones intruding on his time. As the weeks passed, the messages became even more confounding. The author wasn't just a man from the past. Soon another voice emerged, one from the far future, who referred to itself as 2109. It warned Ken and Debbie that they were part of something far greater, a ripple in time that should never have been disturbed. The future voice claimed to be orchestrating events across the centuries. Was it a hoax? An elaborate prank? Or was there truly some phenomenon at play that we still don't understand? Historians, paranormal investigators, and computer experts have all tried to make sense of it, but even now, decades later, no one can fully explain how or why these strange time-bending messages appeared. The Dodlestone time messages remain a mystery, one of the strangest anomalies in the world of the paranormal. Did Ken Webster's home become a portal where time can blend together? Or was it something more, an experiment from a future we can't yet comprehend? The answers, much like the messages themselves, remain elusive. And tonight we delve into one of the most puzzling time anomalies in modern history. What happened in that quiet Cheshire cottage, and who or what was trying to make contact?
Kingdoms rise and empires crumble, and the knowledge and wisdom from past ages are lost in the foggy ruins of time. But for genuine seekers of truth, one place stands alone on a hill. Shining brightly in the darkness, you, dear listener, have reached the Hidden Citadel.
Hey, welcome to the Hidden Citadel.
Welcome back.
You're here with Greg and Willie, and I have a cold, so I'm you're just gonna have to deal with my my raspiness.
It's awesome. It's like an overdrive pedal on his voice.
That's it. I got the distortion going on.
Yeah.
You know, it's ragweed down here.
Oh, it is.
Like it's in full bloom. And I was talking to one of my students' dads the other day, and I was like, yeah, it's the ragweed's getting to me. He was like, what's ragweed? I'm like, where are you from that they don't have ragweed? It's like, I want to move there.
Alaska.
Yeah, something. I don't know. It's like, it's pretty bad here. Did you know?
That's funny.
We should do a whole episode sometime on herbs, but ragweed, the actual leaves of a ragweed plant, is an antihistamine. So even though it causes the problem, it can also alleviate the problem.
That's really funny.
I know it is.
But
But check this out. So
it's like
we were in
opium.
Ireland. Yeah, right. We were in Ireland, and Trevor got stung by a stinging nettle plant. And she turned to Trevor's my wife for you listeners, and she turned to our son-in-law and she said, "Jordan, is there a plant or something growing around here that might help take the pain away?" And Jordan said, "Oh yeah, we use this some plant." And he grabs it. He looked around and it was right there near the stinging nettle.
King's foil.
And it was something like that, and rubbed it on her finger, and all of a sudden the pain went away. And she was like, "I don't even know why I thought to think of that, or why I thought he would know, because he's young."
Oh,
But he knew, and he was like, "Oh, everybody knows this around here." And I was just like, and my wife's not one that's big into herbs. I'm the one that's the herbalist, so it's like, it was really odd that she would have thought that. And then for it to be right there growing next to the stinging nettle. But that's kind of how it works with a lot of plants. And it's just amazing that God kind of created them to be like that.
what's a stinging nettle? I've never heard of that.
So basically, we have them down here too in North Carolina. They're they look, the leaf looks a little bit like a dandelion leaf, but it has lots of little stingers, that little tiny thorns almost, well, they're not even thorns, they're just these tiny little filaments that sting you.
Yeah.
And they're all over the leaf, and when you touch it, they come off and they get stuck in your finger. And there's some sort of I don't want to say a poison, but a toxin, I guess. There's some sort of toxin in them that really irritate your skin. So it's kind of like once you get stung with them, it's not fun. I don't think it's like that bad.
Wow.
It's not like well, there may be people that have really bad allergic reactions, but for the most part, it's just irritating, and you can't see them. They're so hard to see that you're trying to find it to pull it out, and it's just a pain. You don't want to walk into a patch of them, that's for sure, because they will get you. But
And yet,
today,
some plant.
Oh, go ahead.
There's some plant that you just put on it and it relieves you.
Yeah, and she rubbed it on there, and it just took the sting away, and
That's awesome.
yeah. But I've found that there are lots of companion plants like that in herb lore, and you look around and you find this plant works with that plant. One thing that I found that's really interesting is that we talked about the the other thing about stinging nettle real quick is it's also incredibly high in vitamin C. And if you cook it, the stingers come out, and then you can make a tea or something out of the. Some people even eat them, like people that cook up spinach or something.
Yeah.
That's a thing that people do, and stinging nettle's really good. But a lot of plants work together, and one of the things we talked about, the ragweed, has antihistamine properties, but mullein is a plant that has the ability to like loosen up mucus and help you cough stuff up if you're congested or whatever. And they often grow near each other too. And
That's
mullein
interesting.
is that interesting plant you'll see on the side of the road a lot of times. That's got big bushy leaves that are kind of like they used to call it Indian toilet paper because it's real soft. It's like lamb's ear or something, and then it grows up in a stalk, and on the top are these yellow flowers. And mullein has been used forever for respiratory problems. And the other thing about mullein that's really interesting is, and this is completely illegal, and I've never done it, so DNR don't come to my door. But the Indians used to take the seeds, and the seeds have a property that if you throw it in the water, it will stun the fish that are in the vicinity of the seeds. And then the fish will just suddenly float up to the surface because they're stunned.
Wow.
And then you can scoop them up. Eventually it'll wear off and the fish or the fish could die from it. That happens too. But the Indians would only use this in really bad times when like there wasn't enough food to go around, and they would only do it once every 2 years because it brought so many fish up that they were afraid there wouldn't be any more fish in that area.
That is crazy.
Yeah,
How
it's
do
a
they?
neat thing, but you do it nowadays, and the DNR will be on your back real quick.
But it's so funny though. Like, what would cause someone to go? I have these seeds. I'm going to cast them into the water.
My thinking is probably some dad took his kid fishing, and he had a fishing pole, and he was like, I don't want to make a pole for this kid, so he just ripped off a stalk of the, or maybe he was like, we're going to need toilet paper, so he brought it with him, and the kid was like whacking the water, and the seeds came out, and the dad was like, wait a minute, look at this. And I think it's stupid little things like that are probably how these discoveries are made,
Yeah. That's
because, mullein doesn't grow near lakes much. It grows in rocky, crappy soil. So, like, up on the outcroppings of rocks that are near highways, things like that. We were driving through West Virginia, and up on the hillside, it was just covered in mullein,
I've never even heard of it. No.
Yeah, it's grows up there in New York too. I remember seeing some driving up on the Palisades Parkway, and one time I was driving up the Palisades, and I saw we talk about cryptids on this show.
Yeah.
I saw a cryptid. It was the biggest turkey I've ever seen in my life. This thing had to be 7 feet tall. It looked like an ostrich, and it was running down the side of the mountain, flapping its wings. It jumped over the barrier in the middle of the road. It ran across in front of me and then ran up the other side of the mountain. I was like, you could tell it was a turkey, but I was like, how did it get to be that big? I mean, the thing was huge.
Indian Point.
And maybe it could have been Indian Point. I heard they shut Indian Point down. Is that true?
I don't know.
Or are they going to? I think Rob was.
They've
telling
always
me about
said
that.
they're going to. Rob would know because he's like right there.
Yeah, I know he lives right next to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. But there's a lot of people that work there. But it's funny too, like I would go up there a lot of times and all the New Yorkers would be fishing on one side of the river and all the Dominicans would be fishing on the other, and they were like, don't go down and fish with the Dominicans. I'm like, why not? And they're like, because those fish glow in the dark. I was like, well, shouldn't you tell them that? And they're like, I don't know, I don't speak Spanish.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I think everyone's drawn to the conclusion not to fish to eat out of the Hudson, just in general.
Yeah. Just don't do it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Yeah.
I have to close.
And there's a lot of people that swim, and kayak and stuff in the Hudson. It's like, you're not afraid of turning glow in the dark from that. Anyway, we're not here to talk about herbs today, people. Even though we spent quite a bit of time discussing that.
Because
what
it's
we
awesome.
really were talking about, it is pretty awesome. We probably should do a whole show on herbs and also the cutting of roots. I think that would be a pretty cool show.
That would.
But we're here to talk about time travel. We've talked about time travel before, and we mentioned that we were going to circle back around and do another show on it. And today is the day. So, Greg, I want to take a break from talking. Can you tell me some of your thoughts on time travel?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, I was kind of reviewing that other show, and then there's a lot of information, there's a lot of discussion, I should say. I'm not sure there could be research on time travel because it's kind of conceptual in a lot of ways, but then it's also a matter of physics as well. And the thing that occurred to me is that, no matter where you're inserted in a timeline, you can be inserted into a timeline, but you never go backward. It's always at the moment that you're inserted into the timeline, you're going forward. Like there's no going backward in time. I mean, you could be placed somewhere, but at that moment that you are there, you are going forward in that time.
True.
There is never a moving backward. You can't. It's like, in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where they're trying to take the odometer and spin the cars back,
Yeah.
somehow reduce the amount the mileage, and it's just like there. So it's kind of interesting, because if there were time travel, no matter where you are, you go there and you start aging. You go there and go forward. You go there and start advancing in a forward direction. Always, there is no. I mean, I'm not sure. I don't think there's an up and down. I don't think there's a back and forth. That kind of thing. There's no lateral moves really. It's unless it's dimensional. I mean, even though that's kind
right.
of. I mean,
well,
but even
that
still,
makes you
even
wonder
if you go dimensionally, you go in and then you start dimensionally speaking. You have to start advancing. I don't think you stay static.
But what if in another dimension? What if dimensionally what time is one river going this way and another one going the other way? Mm-hmm. And so if you're a being who can transverse time, you know how to leap from one river to the other. You go down a certain way and then you pop back up and go up the other way. It's kind of like the escalators at the mall.
Oh, yeah. I guess so. I mean,
but backwards, it's almost inconceivable. Inconceivable.
Keep using that word.
I don't think you know what it. I don't think that word means what you think it means. It's almost inconceivable that we could even imagine a time that goes backwards. But there was a Red Dwarf episode. Have you ever seen Red Dwarf? It was this crazy British sci-fi show back in the 80s where this guy was the last human because he fell asleep somehow and something malfunctioned and he didn't get out of the sleep chamber for like 5 million years or something like that. And so all that was left was a mutated cat that was Danny John Jules. So he's like this really good dancer, and a hologram of his old buddy his old roommate that he didn't like, and a robot. And that's all that was left.
So funny.
So there's one episode where they get on this planet where everything goes. They're like, it's weird that this planet's moving the opposite direction.
Yeah.
And so that was the thing, that when you got to the planet, everything went backwards. And the cat had to go to the bathroom. And he was like, that was a big mistake.
Oh, that's hysterical.
Are you ready to dive into the unknown? To unravel the secrets of the universe, or at least try? Then you need the official gear of the truth seekers, the legend hunters, and the just plain curious. Introducing the Hidden Citadel t-shirt, the only shirt that dares to ask the tough questions, like who built the pyramids, what's really hiding in Loch Ness, and why does your cat stare at absolutely nothing? This shirt is so comfortable, even Bigfoot would wear it, if we could find him, that is. It's so stylish, the aliens might abduct you just to ask where you got it from. It's perfect for ghost hunting, UFO spotting, or just lounging around while you binge our podcast. Wear it on your next adventure, or while you're pretending to be one of the X-Files. And remember, the truth might be out there, but these t-shirts are right here. Available now in all sizes, but only while supplies last. So don't get lost in the Bermuda Triangle of indecision. Head over to thehiddencitadel.com and grab your t-shirt before they mysteriously disappear. The Hidden Citadel t-shirt. Unravel the mysteries and look good doing it.
That's really funny. I almost feel like one of the things that we have to examine with time travel. I mean, we talked about it before, that anytime that you're in eternity. If you're in infinity and then you go into something finite, you're placing yourself in a timeline. That's a version of time travel, because you're outside and you insert yourself in. So you're not subject to the finite timeline because you're outside of it. Put yourself in, like we'd see with Elohim, that sort of thing, the ageless kind of thing, right? Mm-hmm. But you're inserting yourself in, so essentially you're time traveling because you're going from outside back in. But then we almost like looking at the contrast of time, and I've seen some discussions, I think Chuck Missler used to say this, that it's almost like time is the imposing a repose. Time is like when, it's almost like when he used to talk about when God created everything, and then he imposed a repose for his time of rest. It was really just kind of saying, now things are exactly the way they are.
Yep.
Okay, but once the switch was hit of sin, now there's a ticking down. Now,
True.
Now time is imposed, because that means that things are going to have to be resolved and end.
So you're basically saying that before sin happened, everything, the whole creation was in a timeless sort of thing, just like eternity is timeless.
And what would make sense about that is that, does it say in Genesis that Adam walked with God? That God was, and where God is, you would assume would be eternity. So his garden, his what he planted and what he was a part of, would have some attribute of eternity. So, and eternity doesn't decay. Eternity doesn't.
Well, and if that's the case, then the whole 6-day creation is just shot.
Yeah.
The idea that, well, the world is only 6,000 years old, that just shoots that all to pieces, because if the earth was kind of on pause, then it could have been for a million, billion, trillion years.
Yeah, we don't know.
We wouldn't know.
Exactly. I mean, and but that's really what's being said by a God's day is like 1,000 years. It's like 1,000 years, right? It's not is.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be to show that what we consider to this, could be an expanse of something
past what we can comprehend.
Like the math doesn't add up, because we can't. God's ways are far higher than our ways. God's thoughts are, so as high as the mountains are. So it's supposed to be an expanse of difference between our finite understanding and His infinite understanding. It's funny. I was thinking about the differences in just the basic religions and stuff, and there's a lot of religions that their end game ends up being very material, like like where their heaven is. You think, well, they have they're promised women and riches and stuff. I'm like, but if you're in the presence of your deity, why do you need that? And you'll hear with those religions, some of them, that they try to criticize Christianity by saying, well, what about your mansions? Well, the mansion is about the amount. A mansion holds a lot. So it shows the love, first of all. Second of all, when the streets of gold, if you're walking on something,
it's useless.
It's useless. And so it's like that's that the value is valueless. Like it doesn't have meaning. The most sought after, where your heart is, it's the riches of what's considered to be, the most valuable thing in our life. It has, a lot of times it's to be money and whatever, but or gain. Oh yeah, well, I'm walking on it, so it doesn't have any meaning. So it's done away with, and so that's what you have with our eternity, and with the others, with a lot of the other religions. Well, they're gaining something that should be subject to entropy, or should be subject to loss of value, decay, or an appetite that you shouldn't have if you were actually in a heaven.
Well, and you don't hear an awful lot about the love of the deities for people.
Yeah.
Like I've been studying from the last episode, I've been going down the rabbit trail of pagan deities and from all over the world and all different cultures, and you hear of appeasement of the gods. You're trying to appease the deity, but you don't hear a whole lot about, well, the deity loves us and wants to take care of us. And really the concept of a deity that loves us and wants to take care of us is completely foreign to what you see in everyday life if you're living in a survival situation.
Yes.
And the fact that ever even became an idea is that God loves us is really astronomical in and of itself.
Yeah, pardon the pun. But it's interesting though that looking at that, like that the omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, and yet has an affection for something that he has nothing in common with except for his image. You know, that goes back to time travel, that taking something that outside and yet has everything forever and yet is wanting to dwell with us, inserting his presence into our lives that we may be in his life as well, or be in his presence as well for eternity. I mean, it's almost like, it's funny, like time travel is, as a topic, is so esoteric and a lot of times is really not discussed as much except for in science fiction, but it's very much a part of all 66 books. I mean, it's really, you kind of have to. Oh, but I was thinking of something the other day because I just finished Daniel, the book of Daniel, in the mornings in my reading, and I'll tell you that when you get to Daniel 11, it is crazy. I mean, I had to go look it up, but here's the thing:
that passage is bizarre.
But you could also argue that what Daniel's experiencing in prophecy, because he's going and seeing something in the future. He's going and experiencing. So these visions, and it's palpable. He loses his breath. He drops. He sweats. These are things that are... He feels the touch of something. Well, if it was just a vision, but it was so real and it's something from the future, you're actually advancing from where you are into another space. And you're doing so...
Same thing with John.
Yeah. Yeah, John.
It's like
in Revelation.
Yeah, when he's having his vision, or Isaiah or Ezekiel, I think you kind of point to all of them. When they had their visions, it messed with their brain. It changed their life. It really, was a frightening kind of experience to have those and to be able to see it. And I feel like probably the angelic being just laid out before them and they were able to see into the spiritual realm what was coming. And a lot of the descriptions that you get, it's weird that some people take these as like, oh, it's exactly literally going to be these flying creatures with a stinger in its tail and all this stuff. And it's like, John never says exactly this is what it was. He's saying it was like this.
Yes, it was like that.
It was like that.
Yeah,
It was like a face with hair. And he's like, I don't know what it was. It was weird. But we can speculate now. And I remember when one of the Gulf Wars was happening, people were equating the stingers beings with
helicopters.
I think it was a Tomcat helicopter.
Yeah,
And it's it kind of looks the part,
Yeah. It's so interesting that in their language that they had at the time, they're just describing things. I remember Michael Heiser was saying, Dr. Heiser was saying that it's funny. He says if we were supposed to know they're helicopters, they would have just said helicopters.
Yeah.
So he goes, there's a reason why it is like. Or vague.
Well, it's what Jesus said with the parables. It's for those who are paying attention. One time, I think it was Steve Quayle said, the end times are going to be such a time when you need to be so close to God that when he whispers in your ear, turn left, you turn left and a bullet goes whizzing by.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's kind of what happened with the Trump assassination attempt. It was such a weird thing that he just turned a way that he didn't normally turn.
Yeah.
And I believe that was God protecting him. It's a very strange thing that happened. But, the other thing, too, with time travel is it's a common topic in science fiction that somebody has created some sort of a device that allows you to do this. And yet we see possible, I'm not going to say angelic, but supernatural beings that have equipment that whip in and out of time, it seems.
Yes.
You know, that's what we get with the UFO phenomenon or UAP phenomenon or dots that seem like they materialize here and then instantly they're over here. It's almost like a quark sort of a situation, but with light that people can see.
Yeah, that's interesting because that makes it feel like I forgot, like it truly the dimensional idea that we are stuck in this 3 dimensions or 4 dimensions, whatever it is, and yet something that is not subject to that can enter and exit anytime it wants to.
Yeah.
But it's almost, what's so strange about it? It's almost like whatever that extra dimensional invader is, or dabbler is. It's almost like they do it briefly because they don't. It's almost like there's no gain to reduce yourself to 3 dimensions. It's almost like that's what it feels like.
For whatever reason, we don't get to see them, but we do see evidences of them, like the whole cattle mutilation thing.
Yes.
It blows my mind. I was reading, when I was working on the book, and if you don't know it yet, people, it might be out by the time this episode comes out. We are working on a book called the Encyclopedia of Weird Crap. You can thank my wife for that title.
And when she says crap, it means like a roll of the dice.
Yeah. Actually, it means anything that Greg and I are into that she's not into.
Right. That's right. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. So, but basically, I was working on one of the articles, and it was about cattle mutilations, and it talked about the surgical precision that you find in some of these cattle mutilations is like if you were going to be a prankster doing this kind of thing, you would have to be a surgeon, and yet some of the things are mutilated in a way that even a surgeon wouldn't be able to do out in the field. Right. They might be able to get away with it with a laser in the operating room, but that's a big might, And the cattle mutilations have been going on for a long time.
But what's interesting about that, though? This is why it just feels like, to your point before, like pseudo-angelic or Elohim kinds of beings, because it still goes back to some basic components that are found in Scripture. So you have crop circles. Or just think of Cain and Abel. You have the field, you have the flock. You have and this is what's being almost the effort putting into affecting those in such a way that it could create terror, it could create awe, it could create other religions, it could create a lot of things that are very distracting. But it comes down to those 2 elements like Cain and Abel had, which is the field and the flock. And it's like
true
where those designs happen are there, and it happens to the animals. Yeah.
Well, and I think too that a lot of the phenomena like this that are unexplained, it's almost as if something's just laughing at us. Because the fruit of a lot of this stuff is to draw people away from the Lord. Mm-hmm. It's like a lot of people that experience these sort of things, and I'm not saying everyone, but a lot of them tend to be people who have dabbled in the occult.
Yeah.
A lot of times when people who grew up in church say, start praying or saying the Lord's Prayer or pleading the blood of Jesus or saying stop in the name of Jesus, a lot of times this activity ceases real quick and in a hurry. And it's like, what is it about that? Why do these things flee from the name of Jesus if they're just aliens?
Yeah.
Because if they were just aliens, they'd be like, who? Jesus what? I don't understand what you're talking about.
Yeah,
but there's power there that shuts them down.
And the spirit... And the spirit is not subject to the our physical limitations. And so,
No, not at all.
It's fascinating. We haven't even talked about it before. I'm just thinking of it now. Is in Job. What happens at the beginning of Job? Well, these where have you come from? Well, I've been going back and forth between earth and
to
here.
and fro. Yeah.
Well, what does that mean? That means going from the place of eternity to a place of limitation and back and forth between. So what does that tell us? It means it's entirely not only possible, but it's occurring at a regular basis, because it makes it seem like all of those were doing that.
Yeah. Yep. And that was their job.
And if that's happening, and that goes back to what we were just talking about, that in inserting itself into where we are is inserting itself into a time from out of a time. And that means that and then affecting us. So, I mean, that's also important to know too. So it's like, it's like Heisenberg's thing.
One of the things that I ran into as I was working on the book is I wanted to bring in another one of my interests, which is the child ballads. The ballads collected by Francis Child.
That was insane. I was reading that.
The story of Thomas the Rhymer. Did you look at that one?
I did.
Thomas the Rhymer was a prophet in Scotland, and he was a real guy. Thomas of Eccleston, I think, was his name. And he had all sorts of prophecies that he made that came true. But one of the things early in his life, apparently, is the Queen of the Fairies abducted him, took him away to fairyland, and then when he came back, several years had passed. And it goes along with this time slipping idea that the fairies would take somebody, and when they came back, a big vast time had gone by.
Yeah.
And Thomas the Rhymer was not the only person that said the fairies did this to. Like, this is something that's a common thing where the fairies do this. So I was thinking, I saw something on the internet, and I haven't had time to look it up, but it said the Hebrew is in the beginning, Elohim created the heavens and the earth. And I'm like, if that's really the translation, I thought it was Adonai. I have to look in the Hebrew, I don't remember. But if it is Elohim, that sort of goes along with the concept that God used the spiritual beings to help him create the entire everything. And so it's kind of like our idea that maybe there were fairies that were a spiritual being that were supposed to guard this brook or to work on developing this tree or this group of trees in the forest or whatever. There may be, and I like I said, I've got to research that more, but it seems like it's possible there could be some merit to that idea,
and every time you see, it's always interesting, especially like, well, I mean, Daniel, in Daniel, there's that presence, like we talked about it before with, my Lord sent an angel to close the mouth of the lions. There's so much to that, but in doing so, that means there's whatever it was. It's funny then when you have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Nebuchadnezzar, is it Nebuchadnezzar or Darius the Mede? One of the two. I can't remember who it was with.
I think it's Nebuchadnezzar.
Darius? Oh, with the
Pretty
fiery
sure it was
furnace?
Nebuchadnezzar with, yeah.
Okay. So you have, but he looks in there and he goes, what I see is one like the Son of God, or the Son of, and so what he sees, and what's awesome about that to me is that, that it's in the presence of the Eternal One. The effect and the deadliness of the fire is negated. Not only that, but look what happened there. What was supposed to reduce them, like fire is supposed to do, they increased by one. What was supposed to burn them did not even singe their hair. What was supposed to separate them in such a way, because remember they were being threatened in such a way, to be, almost to be is disintegrated, right? They actually had more fellowship because they were moving around together. They had more freedom. They had, I mean, the first thing that fire does to anything is takes away the oxygen. They were inspired.
True.
They were moving,
Yep.
and they had, I mean, everything was increased. And and the nature of fire throughout Scripture, even all the way up until the end of all things, is to destroy or to punish.
Well, and I read or saw an article. It was this week, actually, oddly enough, and it was called the Fourth Man Syndrome. And it was this idea in psychology that a lot of people that are in desperate situations, they feel like there's another person with them going through the situation. And they were saying that this is trying to figure out why this happens, and there's some sort of a psychological effect. But in this, and they named it after the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego thing. But the difference is, it wasn't Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who noticed the fourth man first.
Yes.
It was Nebuchadnezzar, who was the guy causing the problem, who noticed the fourth man first.
Yeah.
And
That's
it was
really interesting. That's really
so
interesting.
it's like fourth man syndrome is actually a misnomer, because it's not from their perspective. They weren't the ones that reported the fourth man in there. And when they came out of the fire, if I remember right, they didn't even comment on it. Mm-mm. They were just like, well, basically, we told you God was going to protect us.
And well, what's interesting about that is that you have what they were doing in not worshiping the wrong God, or worshiping the idols or whatever it was they're being punished in such a way that if they were done away with, then it would decrease the likelihood that others would follow and worship their God, right? So it's almost the opposite of witnessing, right? Because it's something. Yeah. However, the event here increased because the whole thing of Nebuchadnezzar seeing it was a witness. He witnessed something, the working of God, and something that was supposed to decrease, increased. The whole thing was, it's so interesting.
It's inverse. And that's what time travel back in time actually is.
Yeah.
That's why everybody wants to go back in time, is for that increase.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit. Have you ever heard of the Dawdleston messages?
No.
So basically, in Cheshire, England, in the 80s, there was a strange case which nobody's ever really been able to debunk this as thoroughly as it really would need to be if it was a hoax. And basically, this guy had an old computer, the old style computer, that when he came home, it was him and his girlfriend and some other guy lived in this house. And on the computer, in archaic English, were these messages from, this person who claimed he could see the goings-on of what was happening in their house. And he was, trying to figure it out. And they were like, what is this? So they printed out what the guy wrote. They took it to the college where they worked. And somebody said, oh, yeah, that's language from the 15th. Somebody's pulling a hoax on you. And they're like, okay, well, how could we check and find out if it's a hoax? And he says, well, ask him about, this king or that king or whatever. And so the guy wrote back and he said, I don't know about those kings because Henry VIII is the king and this is how old he is. And then he talks about some other people, and the sheriff and all this kind of stuff. And they're like, what is this? And so then they go to the library, or they go somewhere, and they're like, well, let's look up these names. Some of the names they couldn't find because Dawdleston was a small little village, and it's like, why would they have records? But they did find the sheriff or a knight or somebody that kind of took care of that area. And they were like, okay, well, that person was real at that time period. And basically this went back and forth, and then all of a sudden somebody else started jumping in saying they were from 2190 or something, and they're like, you got to follow these certain rules if you're going to talk backwards in time to. And this thing went on for like a year or two.
Wow.
And that never really got debunked. Like one of the guys left because he was like, "This is freaking me out,"
Yeah.
so I'm moving out. And he later came out years later and said, "Yeah, they wrote that. The guy that experienced it wrote a book about it. He didn't make a lot of money off of it, and he had lots of chances to go and tell his story and make a lot of money off it. But he said the only reason I wrote the book is because the guy in the 1500s told me to write a book and that he was going to write a book too. Mm-hmm. And so I just wrote the book kind of out of obedience, but he never tried to make money off of it or go on TV shows or anything like that. The lady, I guess she's kind of active on Facebook, but that nobody has ever really debunked it. And finally the other guy came out and said, "Yeah, I didn't want anything to do with it, but every little bit of it was true."
Wow.
And so it's just a strange case of a computer being used to, and again, it's like this could cross over into the idea of ghosts too. Like the guy could be typing out the story could be a ghost trapped in that house.
Yeah.
But he talked about how the glowing light appeared in his room and he could type and tell his story on it. And one of the people that looked at the message, there were two scholars of that language, and one of them said this is exactly the way the guy would have talked, and the other lady said, "Well, no, they wouldn't make these kind of mistakes." And I'm like, the guy was a farmer. Why wouldn't he make those kind of mistakes?
Yeah. That's funny.
But
the
fact that he could read it all was amazing.
That brings up something else, though, that really should be kind of integral to a discussion of time travel. That is like information, light, and sound, and how certainly. Look, we have light years. We have seen something in the heavens, that is
right
at a distance that consumes a certain amount of time, right? But we're coexisting in it as almost, because it's there. There's a simultaneity of sorts.
Well, there's a new theory that I've heard. It's kind of a gamer theory, is that we are the only thing that really exists is where we're at the moment. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like how in a video game, if you're in one of those games, it's like an open world game. Until you walk to where the other part of the world is, it doesn't exist.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get there, and then it's there. And it's kind of like, when we look through a telescope, we see something, but until we really get a big enough telescope to see it, it's not rendered yet. And it's almost like God is centralized everything right here.
Yeah. And
all the other stuff is just, it's an illusion or something.
But what if like the physical finite shells that we exist in are one thing, and yet that the things that are able to move in and out of eternity is more like sight and sound. Because look, Jesus being the light of the world, a message that someone hears and sees, the visions, that sort of thing. It's really based on light and sound, and it seems like the physics of those things can go through walls, they can go through everything. So it's almost like the matter of sight and sound is not subject to the same body restrictions or physical restrictions that we have. Therefore, being allowed to move in dimension of sorts that we can't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting too how Jesus picked certain times to make these statements. Mm-hmm. Like it was Hanukkah, the feast of the dedication, when he stood up in the temple and said, "I am the light of the world." Number one, it's pretty weird that you would get it. "Hey, everybody, I have something to say." You're not paying attention. Wake up.
Put the Rubik's Cube down.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Put
right,
the phone down.
I am the light of the world. It's like, what? Okay. A lot of people are like, what is he talking about? Stop lighting that menorah. I'm the light of the world. You know? It's strange. But yet he did it. And he did it at that time period when they were celebrating this miracle that God did for the Maccabees, where he allowed the light to last until they could get enough oil in there to rededicate the temple. And what is the purpose of rededicating the temple? It's so that the Holy Spirit can come back in and reside in the temple.
That's right. That's right.
So when Jesus says, I am the light of the world, he's declaring that he's God, because he's saying he is the light that brings in the Holy Spirit into our lives.
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing. And that's a time travel thing in and of itself, because he had to plan it 400 years in advance for that moment when he was going to make that proclamation.
I never lined those two events up because for some reason I thought the Maccabees was much later. I thought Maccabees happened.
Yeah, it was like 350 BC or 400 BC or something like that.
Wow! So it was way before.
Yeah,
I didn't know.
It was right after Alexander the Great died and his generals took over, and I believe, if I remember right, it was the descendant of the general that took over the area. I think it was the Hasmonean dynasty. I could be wrong about this, but it was somewhere during that time period. And Antiochus Epiphanes, went and defiled the temple by trying to turn it into a temple of Zeus, offering a pig on the altar and splattering pig's blood everywhere, and it defiled the temple. And then it was Judas Maccabeus' father, I think his name was Simeon, I could be wrong about that he basically said, I'm not taking this anymore. And he was a priest, but he started the fight. And then his sons carried it on. And when they kicked those guys out of Israel, basically, they were like, we got to rededicate the temple, but we have no oil. And so they had to wait 8 days, but the candle that they had lasted that full 8 days until they could get enough oil in to actually clean the temple and rededicate it.
I didn't know about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's cool.
But I love,
I
love the Jesus doing the. Excuse me, is this thing on?
Yeah.
Hello, I am the light of the.
Test. Check. I have something to
I
say.
had something to say.
I'm the light of the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Go back to what you were
Elvis
doing.
has left the building. Jesus has left the building.
Who wants the brisket?
That's right.
Try the brisket. That's awesome.
I like Hanukkah. We do Hanukkah every year.
You do it there?
Yeah, at our house.
Oh, that's awesome.
We've been celebrating Hanukkah for a long time because it really bridges the gap between the Old and the New Testament. A lot of people don't catch that, and a lot of Jews don't understand that the New Testament has it right in there in John. It's like, it's amazing. It's really, and there are a lot of Christians that latch on to Passover, but it's like there's a lot of symbolism in Hanukkah that people miss that points to Jesus.
What do you mean it's in John? Like, can you expand on that?
John chapter 8 is when Jesus gets up and says, I am the light of the world. And I believe it's very close to that too, where Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am.
Yeah.
And then they said, we're going to stone this guy because they had gotten sick of hearing him. There were people that were in that temple when he said, I am the light of the world, that said, wait a minute, only God is the light of the world.
Yeah.
And then later when he said, before Abraham was, I am, they were like, this has gone too far.
Yep.
We have to put a stop to this. But Jesus didn't get killed because he was a nice guy that went around. The one thing that really gets me is I really like Douglas Adams' books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Yeah.
But in one of them at the beginning, he says, and this happened 2,000 years after a bunch of guys decided to crucify a dude who basically just said it would be nice if everybody got along.
Right.
It's like, yeah, no, that's not what Jesus was saying, Doug. You missed the whole point.
Yeah. I mean, it's a nice thought, but it's not the reality. I mean, I've heard a lot of people, discuss that and say, why do they, if there's a guy who was alive who's just going around saying, hey, you just gotta love, and he was healing, and he was, making breakfast for people.
Well, that's why there are now atheist
walking,
churches now. That
most people have no problem with it. It's funny that I always think about that with church.
They sing,
like, there's
like folk
there's so many people
songs
that are
and things
looking
like
for
this, and they pretend like they're having church, and
almost like community
they have
supports.
little potluck
if you
dinners
said,
and stuff.
hey, I got this place you go, it's a safe place for your kids. It's probably going to lift you up. You're probably going to feel better after you go. You get to see other people who are also going through things. It's free, and you learn something. And if you were to list all those things, they'd be like, oh yeah, I'd love to do that. Great, it's church.
Yeah.
No,
Prayer.
like it's it's you know what I mean. Like if you're just in our consumerism, if I were just to like list the traits of it, everybody'd be attracted to it. But it's really interesting.
Right.
No.
What do you think? I've heard it both ways, and I don't know what to think. What do you think about Jung? Was he a Christian or not?
Well, that's the early gatherings for Freud and Jung. That's what they were. I mean, they were exactly like a church. They would come there. They'd come there, and they see others who were going through similar things because they're waiting for Freud to speak. So then they'd go there, and they'd have a time of meditation, prayer. They'd have a time of sharing, right? They have a time of, and then they would have almost like a time of a sermon where Freud would talk about.
But I heard it was
and
because
then afterwards,
he was a Christian, that's why he and Freud
that's more
parted
like
ways.
confessional and that sort of thing. I mean, it functioned very much like a church.
Yeah.
I see. It's funny because I was always under the impression he was a polytheist and that he wasn't a Christian because the concept of the multiple kinds of what do they call them? Archetypes, prototype, whatever. What do you call them? Not prototype, archetypes. I think they're archetypes. But he had there's the mother soul, or there's the baby, all those things. In some way it was kind of like I felt like it was. And it may have been. I almost felt like he became a little bit more. His resembled a religion more than Freud's did, and Freud was very much an atheist. And he was. I mean, although when you look at Freud's early work, and he will say that the superego, the perfection that is found often, that is taught to a kid through his parents, is continually moved back by way of child to parent, all the way back to he doesn't know where it would begin, where perfection would start. It's like the idea of the Big Bang. Like, that's all right, amazing. It's fine. You trace it back, but something must have been there, and so. But Freud actually said that there is a spirit at the beginning of this. There would have had to have been,
I didn't know
in order to impart it. And then, because the concept of perfection needs to come from somewhere. You just can't imagine it, and then for it to have an effect on you, it has to be a real thing. And what could be? How do we, having our id and our flaws? How do we have the idea of perfection as a part of us and affecting us? Because if it was absurd, it wouldn't affect us at all, right? So I think Freud even said at the beginning of it, there's this thing, and he doesn't know what it was.
But
in some writings,
it
said that there have to have been like a spirit to start it off.
If he was looking at it as these are external spirits,
that's probably from his early Torah
like
teaching.
Recognizing demonology,
that he's linking that in.
Working on somebody. Maybe that's where he was getting the idea.
But I've heard that about Jung too.
Trying to explain it, I don't know.
I
Did he
don't
work
know
with a lot of people that were
whether he
seriously disturbed,
became
or
a
was he
Christian
working
later.
with just mostly
You know,
normal people that
but when
had
he's
regular
talking about
problems?
those, where Freud had just the id, ego, and superego, right? Jung had all kinds of these things, and they all had an effect, like the mother, the baby, the this, the that, and it sounds very polytheistic to me.
Well, that's the wealthy were doing. That's what I always took it to be.
Yeah, it could be.
It was
Yeah.
definitely a trending thing for them to get involved with.
That's interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you never know,
Yes.
because I think
Yeah, I
everybody who
don't
came to
know.
see
And
both
I
of
don't
them or any of
know
them
from all that I've studied of it,
were
which
coming
is
in
not
with the
extensive.
necessity to be
It,
changed.
it just seemed
And
to me like
and if it's
the
you know,
same
I
kind
think
of
they would all
circles where
say the
Mark
severity
Twain
was such
or
they would need to be changed, 'cause
Conan Doyle or
unless
any
they
of
were
those
just doing it
people
out
that,
of it was
Houdini.
it was
It was
the
just the
the
popular
thing
thing to do
the
was to hang out with
the
Freud or Jung and
the thing that
talk about all
the
these
wealthy would
esoteric
just
weird ideas.
the wealthy were doing,
Like all of our people like to hang out
trend
with
du
us
jour.
and listen to us
Yeah.
talk about esoteric ideas, I guess,
I mean,
because we're the cool
you're
trending
traveling
thing
to Europe,
in this day
you're
and
going
age.
there, you're
That's
meeting,
right.
you're going to these places, and then you're put under. I mean, there could have been, like an opium den. It could be just something that you go in and you get
Yeah.
a high from, and yeah.
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 I would think so. That's one of the things that I feel like I'm missing here in North Carolina that I missed from when I
Yeah.
lived in New York, is there were a lot more people that wanted to talk about ideas
Yeah.
and
That's
of
what.
course back then. Now I don't know so much because
We're in the
it seems
Citadel.
like
If
the
you want to
left
know,
and the right
you
have
got to be
gotten
in the
to be
Citadel.
so
There's something to that, though.
everything
and-
has
and very
become
much
polarized
fellowship
to
is
the point where
is
nobody wants to
biblical
talk
concept,
about ideas
without
anymore.
question. I mean, you don't.
They just want to get mad
The
about
idea
things,
of
and
getting
it's like, I
together
don't
and
know
having
if
and sharing
it
a
might not
common
be
light,
North
to
Carolina.
share
It may be the
like-minded,
political
koinonia, of
climate
having something
of
that
this
is
day and age
that you're
that
you're able
is
to
what
build
I'm
on each other, to
noticing. I don't
sharpen iron.
know.
All that stuff is a very biblical idea. So it makes sense that these thinkers would want to get together, because no matter if it's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's how creativity works. You have to
Well,
bounce ideas
what I was thinking here is
off
that
of other people.
something that God created,
And that's how
like,
it works.
even if
But
it's
anyway,
not
folks, you have been listening to
practiced
the
with
Hidden
God at the
Citadel
center of it,
podcast.
you can see
if you
the
like what
elements
we're doing,
that are still like
try
in
to look
fellowship,
for
where
our
you
book
have
when
these
it comes
thinkers,
out.
you have the
Also,
inklings,
go buy a
you have like
t-shirt,
Johnny Cash and
and,
Shel
if you
Silverstein
wanna
getting
support
together and
what
writing
we're
Boys
doing.
Named Sue or A Boy Named Sue.
But the
You have
biggest
whatever
thing you can do
those collections
is
have a way,
share
and
this
you go
with
and
your
look at
friends.
it like,
if you
well,
have
why?
somebody
Why
that is interested in
it would
some of the
seem
weird
counter
things that we talk about,
counterintuitive based on what we know of, like
today's
different
episode's about
kinds
time
of
travel, but we talk hit on all
early
sorts
man
of different
as depicted.
subjects. So if there's
But yet,
anything you're
it's
interested
important
in,
that they do that.
we're probably going to talk about it at some point.
Yes.
And we may have discussed it all
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
So you guys have a great week, and we'll catch you next week in the Hidden Citadel.
We might have talked about it all today, but we covered a lot of time. Yeah. Well, see you again.
The watchman replies, morning is coming, but night will soon return.